Hey guys, welcome back. In this module, we're going to look at how it all hangs together. So we've covered the roles, we've covered the events, we've covered the values, we've covered the artifacts. But how does it all hang together? So this lesson will take those different concepts and join it up together, just so everybody will have a solid appreciation of how every part of the Scrum framework comes together to work seamlessly and deliver value to the end user. So let's start off with the three roles. We have our Scrum Master role, we have our Product Owner role, and of course we have our development team. Now this whole process kicks off with a vision. So a vision is conceived by the organization, by the product owner, by the VPs. It could even be a vision that is conceived as a result of external influences, such as technological changes, such as political changes, such as compliance requirements. Now that vision sets the scene for all the subsequent activities, because everything else that happens is to enable the organization, the project, the department to achieve that vision. This whole process kicks off with the vision. Based on the vision, a set of user stories will need to be established. Now, these user stories can be split into high-level user stories and detailed user stories. By high-level user stories, we're talking about our features or our epics. So at that high level, we establish what are the activities we need to carry out, what functionalities do we need to deliver to meet this vision. All this information can be elicited through workshops, through engagement with our stakeholders, through interviews, through document analysis, and through all other requirement elicitation techniques. So we elicit our user stories, which of course has to align with the vision. Now, once we have an initial set of user stories, those user stories will need to feed into the backlog. It is the responsibility of the product owner to create the user stories. Ideally, the product owner should be creating this, but practically the product owner does this with the help of a business analyst. Now, once the user stories have been captured, those user stories will feed into the product backlog. Remember, the product backlog is a living document, so there is no end. There is no point in time where the product backlog is closed and cannot accept user stories anymore. So if there are user stories 2 months down the line, it will still feed into the product backlog. So we have our vision. From our vision, we've established our epics and user stories. And then from our epics and user stories, we have created the product backlog. Now what will happen next is we'll go through the sprint planning event. Now, the purpose of the sprint planning event is to establish a sprint goal for the next sprint or for the upcoming sprint. Now, that sprint goal will inform the user stories that will be selected in order to deliver that sprint goal. Remember, the sprint planning event lasts for 8 hours, so it has a time box of up to 8 hours for a 1 month sprint. And if it's for a shorter sprint, then it could take less time. But the time box is 8 hours for a 1 month sprint. Now, during the sprint planning, a couple of things happen. First, the sprint goal is established. Secondly, the what, the user stories, the product backlog items that would enable the team to achieve the sprint goal is identified, selected, and added into the sprint backlog. And then thirdly, a plan for how those product backlog items will be converted into a product increment will also be captured within the sprint backlog in the form of a task. So we will have the sprint planning. Input into the sprint planning will be the product backlog and any other product increment that has been created up until that point. And then the output will be our sprint backlog, which will contain the goal of the sprint, the user stories or product backlog items to be delivered during the sprint, and the plan to convert those product backlog items or user stories into a product increment. Now, once the sprint planning is done, then the sprint log will now be used on a daily basis throughout the life cycle of the sprint. And as they go through the sprints on a daily basis, there will be a daily scrum. The daily scrum is a 15-minute time-boxed event where the team reviews their progress for the past 24 hours. So it's all about asking questions such as, what did you do yesterday? What do you plan to do today? Are there any impediments? This is an opportunity for the developers to highlight any challenges that they're facing, to highlight the progress they've made on the sprint, and to gain insights from others as well and understand how the sprint is progressing as a whole. Now, this happens on a daily basis. The time and location for the daily scrum is usually fixed to maintain a level of consistency throughout the sprint. And at the end of the daily scrum, if there is a need for the developers to have further conversations on specific topics, then they're more than welcome to do so. At the end of the sprint, we're going to have a new functionality built. Now, this new functionality will be the hard work of the developers during the sprint timeframe. Once the new functionality has been built, the next step will be for the team to present that new functionality to end users or to key stakeholders through an event called the sprint review. Now, the sprint review is also a time-boxed event that lasts for 4 hours for a 1-month sprint. Now, this is an opportunity for the developers and the Scrum team as a whole to present what they've done to key stakeholders and also get feedback from the key stakeholders. It usually takes the form of a demo, a product demonstration where they demonstrate the new functionality to the key stakeholders, get their inputs into the new functionality, and in some cases, avail the new functionality to the key stakeholders for them to interact with and get a first-hand feel for that particular product. Now, this is also the event where the next priority is decided. So there will be a conversation around what is the next priority for this project? What should we be looking at next? What's the next most valuable item to the organization, to end users, and to the project? After the sprint review, the next step is for the team to review how they've worked together. And this happens in the form of a sprint retrospective. Now, the sprint retrospective is an opportunity for the team to look at how they've worked together as a team. Are there any practices that we need to improve upon? Are there any process improvements we need to incorporate into our way of working to ensure that we are able to seamlessly work together, to ensure that we increase our understanding of each other, to ensure that we increase the excitement within the work environment? All those conversations happen during the sprint retrospective. Now, the sprint retrospective is the last event that takes place in a sprint. The first event is the sprint planning. The last event is the sprint retrospective. Now, during the sprint itself, there is an additional session that happens where you groom the backlog. So it's called backlog grooming. And this is an opportunity to review the items within the backlog, the user stories, and flesh them out, add additional detail to those items. For example, it could be adding estimates to the user stories. It could be adding acceptance criteria to the user stories. It could even be refining the user stories to make it more meaningful to the developers and to the Scrum team as a whole. So that activity happens during the sprint itself and should not consume more than 10% of the developer's time. So after the sprint retrospective, we'll go back and start the next sprint through a sprint planning meeting. This is the cycle of events. This is every single thing that happens during a sprint. So within an Agile Scrum project, there will be multiple sprints, and every single sprint will start with a sprint planning meeting and end with a sprint retrospective meeting. Next, we're going to talk about testing in Scrum. How is testing even carried out in an Agile environment? So stay tuned, and I'll see you soon in the next lesson.